Howdy folks. Today we're going to talk about a common situation that you'll run into, which is where you have the result of one API call and you need to put that into another API call to get some data. It's a very common situation, chaining APIs together, and there's a couple ways we can go about it. Let's get into it. So, very simple index HTML. We're not going to be doing a lot of HTML here. And we have our script, and here's our two APIs. Okay, we have get user ID by name, which takes in a name as a query parameter, so it'll be name equals something like that, and it returns an ID. Why are the APIs set up this way? I don't know. Sometimes APIs are just that way. You know, sometimes when people are building an API system, they build it so that not all pieces of data are acceptable in all places. Then we have get user by ID, which takes in an ID as a parameter, and it's going to return the actual user data, which means if all we have is a name, we actually have to call user ID by name to get the ID so we can pass it into user ID to get the full user object. You'd think maybe they would have some way of us getting the user object by name, but apparently they don't. So let's declare a name here, right there. Okay, and let's do our first fetch. Okay. Oops. And this is going to be user ID by name. Name equals name. Okay. Result. And if result.ok console error, there was a problem. Else, we're going to result.json then use ID data. And let's just see what our ID data is. Make that function. Log ID data. Let's see. Oh, there's a CORS issue on it. Let me fix that. Okay, now that that's fixed, now we can see we get ID of 1. And that comes from my network call here. I give it that payload, and it gives me that response. Very cool. Okay, so now I got to pass that in to this user by ID. Well, there's a couple ways we could do that. One of them is we could just put it in here, right? Host, user by ID, ID equals data ID, another dot then, and very similar to here actually, so just pop that in there, and then after our JSON, this should be our user data. Okay, that might work. Let's try it. Okay, ooh, that gave me a 404 on that ID. That's interesting. Okay, fix that. It was just a bug in the server API. So now we call this and we get our user, which gives us some additional information about them. This is okay. It's not the end of the world to have to do this, but it doesn't look great, right? And what if I have some extremely complicated logic that needs to go in here? Or maybe I have some complicated logic that needs to go in here. How do we handle that? Well, one thing we could do is actually put these both into functions. Okay, so maybe I could declare a function, get user by name. And I pass the name in, okay. And now we're just going to call that, okay, get user by name. But then I could also declare another function, get user by ID. Okay, and I could actually just take this entire fetch and put that in here. And then I could call that .id. And clean that up. So now that looks a little cleaner. One of them is calling here, and then it gets that user, and then it calls the other function down here. quite a bit cleaner. Okay, and if I run that, you could see same data, we get the same thing. Now, if I wanted to process that data, I could say like process user. And then in here, I would just call process user user. Like that. Now, each one of these is a clean function. And what do I mean by that? I mean, it does one thing. Get user by name just takes the name, and then it's going to get the user ID, and it's going to pass it into get user by ID. Get user by ID is only responsible for taking the ID, getting it, the user for it, and passing that into process user. And now here is where you might put your HTML. So this is a really common way of doing this. It also lets these separate out because maybe at some point I do actually have the user ID somewhere else. Maybe I put it in local storage, so then I just need to call user by ID instead of user by name. It works. But, and this will be, for those of you that don't know how promises work, this will probably be the one that you want to work with. But if we look into promises, there's a little bit, sometimes a little bit better of a way that we can handle this. Okay, so fetch here, we have that dot then. We can also chain another dot then on the end of that. If you don't want to do your multiple functions like this. And then you could actually take advantage of the return in this way. So I could return and return this. And actually, you know what? I could just return result.json. Let's just do that. The only thing that is problematic with this is if there's actually an error, then you have to throw an error. So actually, maybe let me bring that code back. Okay, so this would actually be throw new error. Otherwise, we return JSON because we don't want to continue if there's an error. Okay, and let's take this out. Just make it cleaner. So you can see like this does clean up that code. Function data. Oh, actually, no, we've got that right in there. So now what we've got is we've got our ID data in here, but we could do something similar. We could take this dot then out as well and put another chained promise in there, kind of similar to what we had before. Same in here. And then we're actually going to pull that final dot then in here and call process user with that. This doesn't look terrible. It's not amazing, right? Like it's definitely like doing it by other functions is kind of nicer because it lets you split that separation of concerns. But you can see using the promise chaining here, we've made this a lot nicer, a lot cleaner because it's not that nested structure. Okay, so that's version 2. Version 3 is if we used async await, which makes this a lot cleaner. So we would just equals await. Actually, let's do a let on that. And throw new error. Data await, and then similar here, result equals await. Just turn all of those into that. Okay, we have that same here. And user data equals await. And then we process the user. This is much cleaner, right? And so here's our ID, here's our user, and we could even like put some space in between them if we want. Obviously, this is the ideal, right? This looks good. It's very clear what's going on here. If you don't understand async await or you don't want to use it, you can't use it for some reason, the previous structure will also work just as well. And if you can't use promises or don't fully understand them, then the multiple function structure will also work. So anyway, that was 3 separate ways of calling multiple APIs, make it so that your code isn't awful. I hope this is helpful. I'll see you all next time.